So, hello everyone. In today's talk, we'll talk about remote development in a remote first world, right? Because because I think this is pretty crazy, right? Like overall, like two concepts that are like the forefront of development and like in general, right? Remote first and remote development. So I'm pretty excited actually to give the talk. So let's get started. So first of all, I'll introduce myself. Uh, so I'm Tarun Pothulapati, an engineer at Gitpod. Uh, so previously, I was a maintainer of Linkerd, one of the CNC of open source project at Buoyant. Uh, so, uh, I mean, my day job works around like Golang, etc. And then I also do a bit of Rust here and there. So I'm currently from Hyderabad, India. It's one of the South Indian metropolitan cities in India. Uh, I'm also an amateur runner. I've been trying to do a half marathon, but the progress isn't great yet. And also, I like coffee, like a lot of us, I guess. And you can find me at tarun.xyz, right? So that's all about me. So before we jump in, right? One thing that I wanted to give an heads up, right? So obviously, if you're giving a talk on remote development from a company that like tries to sell you remote development, it's kind of funny, right? But obviously, I think so uh, yeah, so to give you some context around this, right? So before joining Gitpod, right, even at our previous place, we used to have like a so everyone used to get a virtual machine on the internet, right, on some cloud provider. It was Azure then, but then like once you got a VM, you used to like install VS Code server there, and then you used to SSH into the VM. So we did remote development like even in my previous job, and that was how you get things done. And I was like pretty much impressed, right? There is some work around like to set up the VM and to get your like whole thing set up right with your dot files and whatnot. But once that was done, right, uh, and you installed VS Code and you used to use the whole VS Code remote dev stuff to move from like your local development into the VM, right? And then it worked great. A part of me felt uh, the this feels like local. This feels awesome. The why is it like this is the normalcy yet, right? And then I also thought, what if someone like abstracted the setting up process away, right? So that you can just like spin up uh, a developer environment right there. And that's what like got me to Gitpod actually. And now that like not just with Gitpod too, right? Even with GitHub code spaces. Uh, I think the time for remote development is here. Like if you see the whole ecosystem, right, it's shaping up like it is it is growing very fast. There are a lot of innovations like happening every day. It's pretty crazy out here, that I can guarantee. So obviously there's a lot of Gitpod stuff in this talk too, but a lot of the talk applies to remote development in general, right? You could use any of the offerings out there. I think there is a converging happening on, because like even though like each company could have like each product could have started out in a different basis, in a different focus area, but then now I think like all of them are getting into a feature parity, and I think you would see similar stuff everywhere. So that's the case here. So now let's get in. Mm. So so bef- so in the talk, right, so let's go back to history. I think we'll start from so in this talk what we'll do is that we'll go back to like the early days of computing environment, and then create a timeline of what all things happened and why I think this is the right time for remote development, right? Because without the without history you can't really predict the future. I think so let's go back to history. We went a bit too far. Not that far. So let's come back a bit. So I think so time sharing environments in general, right, have been here for a while. Like these aren't new, right? Where you have like multiple clients, terminals as they call it, and then you used to like SSH into or whatever SSH into a centralized system and then write code, run things, etc. Right? This has been like I think this is the oldest. This was the first way of doing things, right? So where you used to have like the central resources that you used to use from terminals across, right? I mean, obviously, this isn't the same thing that we have right now, obviously, because that time the reasoning for this is the lack of resources, right? I mean, the computers were costly and whatnot, uh, and obviously, I read a lot of this on Google, so it's probably true. So the reasons for this being like the higher resource cost, uh, centralizing things was easier, right, back then. And also all of this was on a local network, right? I don't think like even internet came about when this was there. So so this goes as far as like the initial computing days in general. So now even SSH, right? Even the protocol that we use right now was invented in 1995. So like this whole concept around like uh, using a client computer and then executing things, doing things on a remote server, or whatever you call it, has been here for a while. Like yeah, this was a normalcy back then, even then. So I mean, SSH was in 1995, and then SSH was even a successor for other like shell protocols, right? That weren't secure, that had some problems or whatever. So all of these things were here for a while, and then all this, and then a lot of things changed, right? Like a lot of things happened like over the years, like not just in 1 year, but then a lot of things happened that include faster, cheaper, and smaller computers, right? Like computers have become faster. A lot of is a lot of it is because like Moore's law, where we were able to like have higher, denser chips at a lower cost because of the scale of production and whatnot. So computers became faster, they became cheaper, and they also become smaller, right? This kind of like provided a way into this whole like local development being the default, right? Because there wasn't a reason to actually use another computer when you're able to do the same on your local, right? The cost wasn't that high as previously, and we were getting there on a lot of things. So other than this, uh, the programming as a concept, right, it also evolved like exponentially over the years, right? We started from C, we created like other languages, runtime languages. There are like multiple variants of it where you have a runtime statically typed, dynamically typed. So there has been like an exponential growth in how even we program computers and applications too, right? We went from like one C or whatever, one single language, and then we created a whole ecosystem of like uh, of using specific things for specific stuff. And there's also some converging around like you could use this there and all that, right? So programming as a concept has grown like exponentially, and this created also a reason for development to become complex across the stack, right? Now you can't just like need a shell and write code in nano or whatever editor, right? You need language plugins, you need intelligence to move around. You can't just you can't just like write it in a file and then run a command to execute, right? There's a lot more needed actually to program computers now. So you need language tooling, it could be linters, it could be debuggers or whatever, right? So there's a lot of stuff that needed to program computers. So it became complex across the stack, right? From the compiler, from debugging, all the way running, production, whatnot. And then ideas, IDs, right, as tools also became like crucial components in the way we work, right? Like even if you go back to some years, Visual Studio, I've been there, and also Atom and all that. I mean, they are editors, but they still have. I mean, they play at a middle ground, I think. So overall, I think like this means that to work in teams, etc., IDs have become like the normal. I mean, not just IDs, but editors, powerful editors, right? That have like language specific things that they support or whatever. And also, there's a lot more things that you need to run a single component, right? It is because of dependencies. Uh, you need to install OpenSSL or whatever, right, to do things in your application. uh, so obviously, because of all this and a lot of other reasons, local development became the default, right? Y- yeah, because of bigger machines, better machines, we started to develop locally. We understood that okay, yeah, this is the better way. And also, I think the internet wasn't as much as around, obviously. So to take the leap, so obviously all of these factors concluded local development has become like the default way to do things, right? We have all habituated with on how to do things. I I think there was a space in the timeline, right, where local development, we were all happy with local development, and thought this is it. We don't need much more innovation in programming. We are all happy. I think and nothing more was needed. But oh boy, we were wrong, obviously. that this wasn't that this wasn't the end game, right? There was a lot more needed. I think this was because, and then a lot of other things happened, right? Then again, because obviously a change is the only constant. There are always stuff happening, new things are coming up, some complex, some simplifying stuff. I mean, even complex stuff, they simplify something, right? Otherwise, why are we even using it? Like, if you compare, like Java could be considered as a complex thing, right? But you still get simplicity on the writing part of it, right? You're not really worried about like garbage collection and whatnot. So all of the tools that came about, like had some benefit to it, right? Otherwise, like why are they even popular? So then a lot of things happened again, and this includes development became a lot more complex now. So build systems, right? Now we have build systems to build things that like stitch together components to give you an artifact. It's not as simple. And then all of the development becoming more complex across the stack, like even in JavaScript, right? There are a lot of dependencies that you have to take up, pinning them. It's not as easy, obviously, and there are right reasons for it too, right? It's not just like we just thought let's do more work. It's just that that was the way that we had to do. And then also, one other, like, the outcome of all this is that running like full production systems locally is getting harder and harder as we goes, right? Because a lot of times you have like multiple applications being worked on in the company, and then you have like dependencies, etc. I think without Docker it would have been even harder, right? Because Docker yeah, Docker like kind of like took away that running things part of the complexity. But still, even when you're developing, right, you still, if you want to, like, if you don't want to build Docker containers and run them, there's still like complexity around like the IDE language tooling. There's also complexity around like what your application needs. So there is complexity across the stack. And then um, that's so this is not just me like telling this, right? If you see any of the bigger companies, right, Shopify, I think there are other companies too, where they have DevX teams, right? A lot of them understood it like pretty much that it's getting harder to run things locally. So for example, let's take an example of a SaaS application, right? There are multiple things needed to run a single SaaS application. This is you need a database, you need an object storage, you need the web application itself, you need web jobs that run to trigger emails or whatever. So there are like multiple components to it, right? And then like running locally, yeah, isn't cutting it for a lot of the bigger applications. And you can see that in the case studies of any big companies that are focusing on developer experience, right? To make sure that their developers are productive, etc. Running locally is getting harder. But obviously this is not like a generalization. There are people like who are happy it's small scale applications or whatever. But that's not the case at all. Like, if you if you see generally. Mm, so now we also have, yeah, because of all this complexity around languages, runtime frameworks, now we have a huge problem of like dependency hell, right? Where it's very hard to like specify the dependencies of an application. And even if you do, if you run it locally, right, and then you want to run your other application, it is tougher again. uh, like, I remember my days with with Python virtual environments, and it wasn't fun. It was a lot of like boring unnecessary work that felt like you have to do to get things done, etc., right? So and each framework has its own thing probably, and it is getting complex, right? I think we could do a whole talk on dependency hell, both on like the runtime level, in your application level, runtime level, on a user level too, right? If you want to have just for example, right? If we want to run your application locally and have the changes like on spot, etc., you have to get the dependencies right and etc., right? So it's not as easy anymore. Yeah, things are becoming complex. Yeah. But obviously a lot of the things changed, and there are a lot of like good things that came about, right, from the change. Some examples, obviously, the network has become faster now. Now I don't think like we are I mean there are places where internet is the problem, but if you take in general, see, right, internet has become like much faster. Like even I think, even if you want to do like general development, right, removing the whole remote part aside, I think like internet has become like a default dependency, right? If you want to run like a Docker image, you have to do a pull to a registry, and images are like pretty hefty sometimes. And even for your application, if you want to run your application, you have to download the dependency. So I think internet generally became like a default dependency overall in the case. And then there's another good thing that happened, right? Like cloud democratized yeah, compute. Now it's pretty easy to get a VM to run things, right? It's not very hard. It's pretty easy, simple, and abstracted away, right? You can have like there are a lot of tools to which you can use to spin up like cloud compute environments where you can run things. It's very easy, and it's very easy to get started. It's very easy to abstract them. It's very easy mm, to have them reproducible, right? It could be a Terraform script, it could be a lot, it could be a lot of things. And then reproducible, like computing environments have become a thing, right? So now we saw the problems of like the a developer like dependency hell. Running locally is hard, is getting harder and harder. And also nowadays, like even though like we have the best computers ever, we have a lot of other things to do, right? Like work, like all the meta work stuff. It could be like Slack, it could be your Chrome. There are a lot of things to that you need to actually run, to actually write code. And then these are all at like conflicting proportions, right? A lot of times, like I mean, I don't think I could have done this stream if I had to like run some Docker container as a demo, right? Because obviously there are limited yeah, resources. Like I mean, we could there. I mean, computers are getting faster and faster and whatnot, but they're still limited. And I think applications are also getting bigger, right? They take a lot more resources these days. So so can we do something here, like combining the problems to fix the problems with the good things that happened over the years, right? Like network becoming faster and compute environments like becoming easier to set up, etc. What if we take developer environments and put it in the cloud? Yeah. So that's what I thought. Yeah. So because like creating cloud computing environments is easier. Let's take the developer yeah, environment and put it in the cloud, right? So that's what I was getting at. Because yeah, network is not the core problem these days. There could be instances where network is not great, but there's still that's not the majority, right? uh, but still, even if you want to take the developer environments and put it in the cloud, right, there's still a missing piece, right? You can't just like yeah, remotely SSH into a thing and then like run yeah, SSH into a thing and run commands and write code in the nano or whatever through the command line and be like, oh, yeah, this is remote development, right? There's still a lot of things I'm missing to put that developer environment into the cloud environment. You can spin up a server, install things, and then like write code there, run things. That can be done, but there's still a missing part, and I think that part is the IDE experience, right? You want an IDE experience that feels, you want a, leaving even the IDE experience aside, right? You want a development experience that feels as local as possible, but it's not locally, but it's not running locally. And I think yeah, this is where this whole like recent developments, this is the reason why I think we are talking about this problem, remote developments and all, recently and not some while ago, right? Because a lot of things have changed. And one of the important things is the VS Code remote development, right? Where you get you can connect your local VS Code into a remote code server running on a machine somewhere else in the cloud, in your on provision environment, wherever. And then you could get an experience as close to home as possible, right? And and this is not me lying about the network latencies. I think it's pretty fast. Because I've seen it at multiple places, right? Like I said initially, it feels as close to home as possible. There's not much latencies. I mean, I don't, because as a developer, right, you can't use anything that like that doesn't feel like as fast as possible, right? I mean, because when you're writing code, you want like an experience that is as reactive as fast as possible, right? Because when you're writing code, you have to you expect intelligence to work show up a drop down menu, and all of that happens because uh, the VS Code has this feature where it talks to the remote machine and then renders all that onto the UI, right? But all the processing is happening somewhere else. The code is living somewhere else. The extensions are living somewhere else. So it's pretty awesome that way. And also, VS Code also has this a feature where some extensions can run on the client. Like there's a Vim extension in VS Code where you get Vim bindings, and there is work to move that onto the browser, right? Because you want to move between code like very fast. So there's a lot of innovation happening on this uh, uh, this remote development in editors. And also I think this is the same problem as we saw in the web development, right? Like what goes into the client and what goes into the server. So there are multiple ways to do it, right? Thin client, server, thick client, thin server. So the same stuff feels like it is repeating here, and it's a good thing, right? Because you can do like yeah, you're getting multiple options now. So it's as local as it can get, right? And also it's not just VS Code that is doing it. Other IDs are also following the suit, right? There is JetBrains that is also doing this. Visual Studio I think also already has this. So this is a path, like in general, right, that IDs are taking as their next way into this whole like the remote development. And I think we'll see why this is happening in a future slide, right? Because it's not just like about taking your code and putting it in a server that lives somewhere, right? There are a lot more innovation. I think a lot of the innovation that we took away from Docker, where of reproducible environments into developer environments now. So Docker created this whole uh, solve this problem around deployment stuff, right? Deployment and running things. But developer environment is still the same, right? You're coding locally. You're still yeah. So 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 I think there are being lessons are taken away from all that practices that we learned into the IDE experience, and we'll see a lot of innovation like later in the talk on this specifically. Mm. So just so like I said, right? Just taking your local code and putting it into the cloud, right? Like we saw into a remote machine. It may not be even be cloud, right? Into a remote machine is not like the core focus of what we're doing here, right? We sh- they there should be a lot more, and there is actually. So and that's what we get. Uh, and that's what we are getting here, right? What if we could do something better here? Because now we have a nice abstraction of having an ID experience that feels as close to home as possible. But even though like all the processing, the code base is somewhere else on a remote machine, right? What if we could uh, we could have more improvements on top of that, right? You're taking that foundation. So I think that's where a lot of the innovation right now is happening, and that is what a lot of the I mean a lot of times when you suggest like a remote development to someone, it's always a thing that people know, right? It's not something new. Like we saw in the talk, there has always been patterns that people followed. It's not a new concept. People have been r-syncing code into their servers for a while, so it's not a new thing, and it's not a new thing. But I think all the innovation right now started with VS Code, obviously, and then now that all the IDs are doing it, there's a lot of innovation happening on how you provision the developer environment, right? And I think that's where the real innovation is right now, and I think that's what will change the course of the remote development in a big way. So let's get into that, right? even though even though we took the code base away from the client, from the local development into a remote machine, you still have to set it up first. You still have to you still have to like start it up. There's some parts of it that are not uh, that can be abstracted away, right? Because we saw all the things that happened with Docker to have reproducible environments, right? So even though like you have this VM somewhere, a machine, a remote development environment, but it's still a pet, right? If it's gone, all the code is gone. If it is it's not reproducible anymore. Yeah, at least I mean you can do Terraform and do all that. So that's where we are getting it. But all the Terraform or whatever are still at the uh, that's still at the process level, right? You install some things, that is done, but still you have a lot of idea configuration, etc., right? So that's what we'll be focusing at in this whole like developer reproducible ephemeral developer environments. So so the thing is that what if, just like we have like GitHub Actions, the config files, right, which ask to do a specific thing. What if we have a similar thing for developer environments too, right? Where in a config file you specify all the VS Code extensions that you want, where where you specify what all you want to install into your environment and whatnot. And I think that's where the the world is moving at. So for example, so with Gitpod, we'll also see other examples. With Gitpod, this is what you can write in your gitpod.yml. It's a configuration file in your repository that lives in your repository. And when you have this, you're essentially specifying it what you would run, right? You're specifying it, the stuff, the commands that you would do to build the project, to run it to, not just like provisioning, but also run your application in your development environment, right? Because that's what we do. uh, so you specify the ports of your application, and then you also specify the commands that you use to build the application. Yeah, and all of this like goes into a configuration file, and obviously the configuration file also takes a Docker file as a dependency, right? As you can see in the image file. And in that Docker file you can specify all the dependencies that you need in your environment. So when you get the developer environment, right, you that image is ran as an environment. And in that environment you run all the tasks, and then you also open these ports so that all of it feels like a local, right? Because all of this is running on a server. But you want to when you also, for example, when you're doing a web application, right, localhost 3000 is exposed here, right? But you should not go to the server and see that UI, right? I mean the web applications UI to access the port. That is all done, right? Because you specified the port here, it's automatically opened here locally. So you when you do localhost 3000 on your local computer, yeah, because of SSH, the port is also forwarded over, and you can see that application locally as close to home as possible. So so you could do that. And also VS Code also has a VS Code from Microsoft also has this VS Code container config thing. That is essentially the same thing, right? Where uh, just like even in gitpod.yml, you can specify all the extensions. You can specify any VS Code settings too, right? That's awesome. So now when you have this file and open this environment, you get an environment with all the extensions that you want of your editor. You also get all the settings. If you have like autosave, you can enable it. So now you have all the project level settings that are needed for developing this application, right? Not deploying, not running, not how to run this. That is a whole different topic. But to just develop the application actively, I think yeah, this config helps. And you can have like post processing commands. You can have init commands, right? You can ask it to install things. But this is just the format, right? You have this file in your repository, and then there's a VS Code remote containers extension, right? Where uh, which yeah, when you open this application, right? So for example, with how VS Code does this, when you open VS Code with an application that has this like config file, it automatically like creates a local container that has all this setup. And you're just and your VS Code is just like talking into that application, into that container, and not really like installing all the extensions locally. It's all inside the container. So you have like an ephemeral like developer environments, right, that are not specific to your local. It's all specific to the project now, which is awesome, right? This means that each project like can get its own like configuration, not just get its own configuration, but also run it in a separated isolated manner that doesn't affect your local development experience, right? That is pretty good, because this is installing all this was already done, right? You can have .vs code file that installs things, but it is local. But when you do it on a remote container thing, it's all run inside a container. This meaning This means that it's all isolated for that specific application project, for that specific time even. So now in this case we saw that each project can get its own like mm, its own dependencies for developing it, right? It could be extensions. This is all VS Code right now. So the config format, right, that we saw both with Gitpod and also with VS Code and GitHub code spaces in general is all specific to VS Code right now. But I think there is there is work being done to make it like cross compatible for multiple editors, etc. So there's a lot of stuff happening, and I think that's where all the new innovation will go in, like having a standard format like a Docker file. Maybe that would be awesome, I think. So now now that you have like a project specific like configuration format, right? But that's not all we need. A lot of times I have my own the changes in the developer environment, right? I use some of the I want some extensions that I use. I want a theme that I use on VS Code. I also have a shell that I love. There's a lot of stuff, right? And all of the current remote development products, right? It could be GitHub Codespace, it could be Gitpod, and all of them, they support dot files already. So you can give your repository of dot files, and they are all overridden on top of the project's environment whenever you spin up an environment. So which is pretty cool, right? So now you can take up your local power user environment and have it anywhere. It can be on any cloud. You can get the same experience. Yeah. Now what do we get, right? So now what we s- from what we spoke, we, we will have a config format, but there's still some parts missing, right? Like obviously now we moved from pets to cattles, right? Even for developer environments where you're not really worried about like closing down a machine and worrying about losing things, right? Because when you create one, all of them appear again because you're using Docker and image as a dependency to get all the images, and also override those settings by having stuff in the config, right? We could do a lot more once you have this like whole ephemeral way of doing things, right, where you can spin up and spin things down. I think it opens up a lot of possibilities, and I think that's where all the innovation is, right? Because let's see. So this means that when you have a config format in your settings for your project, right, anyone can open your project uh, and be powerful with the project, right, to run things without having to worry about dependencies. And wow, that feels pretty awesome, right? There isn't a lot of onboarding where you have to install like 100 things. Like at Gitpod, I haven't installed anything locally, so I think we speak for it, and a lot of other companies too, right? I saw that in happen where you're not really worried about installing things to make your application work, right? Because they're all isolated into a container that is running locally or somewhere else, and you're not really worried about installing its dependencies, installing extensions specifically for it. It's all isolated. So onboarding now has become much simpler, from having like a wiki to install things to all the way to just open it and then it's all provisioned. Wow, that's a big leap. And I think that's where a lot of like developer happiness is there, right? Where you are really not worried about like your application dependencies and how it interacts with your local environment. So that's all abstracted away and separated, which feels awesome. And now this means that increases accessibility, right? If you're an open source project, I think you should definitely do something like this, right? Because you can't have your maintainers or anyone who wants to help to focus on like the all the work, all the meta work, right? Installing things that needed to work and making sure everything works. It's very hard. Like for example, even in CNCF, right? If you take a bit of a complex application, it's not at all easy to run and test things out, right? It's not as easy. So abstracting that away and separating uh, it out takes a lot, like essentially pushes all the bar like a very higher, and it makes everyone to create like developer environments to do some changes a lot easier. Yeah. And so so this is my most favorite part of the whole talk actually. So when you now that we have an ephemeral environments, right, where you're not really worried about like losing things, everything is always there. You can all the installation happens, you get all the same experience of your code. This means that you can create task specific developer environments, right? So for example, um being developers, every time you're writing your own code, there's always someone like asking for a review, right? And it takes a bit of uh, switching things, right? Like obviously context switching mentally, which feels sometimes okay, but a lot of times context switching physically also isn't fun, right? You just want to stash out your core, or you could do some things like working trees or whatever, right? But it's not as simple as that. So but with with this whole ephemeral way of doing things, right, you can have like multiple developer environments that are specific to a specific task, right? And you can have write things, push that out into your GitHub repository. This is yeah, this is all pretty awesome, right? Where you're not really worried about like switching, like context switching physically, where you have like multiple environments and you're not real and all of them and each environment you get all has all the things to be productive. So in this example, we have like two options on the website itself. On a PR review, where you can create a code space on this specific branch, right? So that you don't have to even check out the code, etc. It's already there, and you can also do the same by clicking the Gitpod button, right, where you get a Gitpod environment specific to that PR, where the code is already checked out and you're ready to review already. And I think both with Gitpod and GitHub, they already installed the GitHub pull request extension into your VS Code. You're already logged in. It's pretty awesome. You have to check it out, like how easier you can go from like, this is a new PR, all the way till like writing a comment, running things. Wow, yeah, yeah, it takes out a lot of unnecessary repetitive actions, right? Checking out code base, and if you're using the VS Code GitHub extension, like getting the PR, etc. and and you can also take this a bit notch higher, right? So for example, whenever there's a new PR, right, all the people who are planning to do a review, they all run the same building commands, right? You build the project, I build the project, I run it on my own place, you run it on your own place, but we're all building the artifacts, right, to check how a thing is running, etc. What if by integrating developer environments into your source code management, right, every time you do a push of your code, automatically your code is built because you specified your build commands in the gitpod.config, right? Your code is already built and there's an environment already ready for you to check out with all the artifacts. So now all you can do is like npm run and it runs. You don't have to like build, etc. And you can use the same, and that is shared across all the people, right? So wow, yeah, this is pretty cool. And I think even like yeah, GitHub is also working on a similar thing to integrate, yeah, yeah, developer environments into your source code management. So in this example, we see that here you get a the you get in your GitHub checks UI, right? You already get a Gitpod link where you, if you click that, you get a developer environment that already has all the, that has already artifacts specific to this PR. You don't even have to build things, and that is shared across all the people like who click on that button, right? Which is pretty awesome. And this all automated, uh, feels pretty cool, and a lot of like repetitive actions is taken away, right? If uh, in the current example we saw how you can see a PR where like, this is new, and just clicking an button, you're already given an environment where things are already built, and you're just like checking it out. You're not really invested in building stuff anymore, because this is all ephemeral, abstracted away, right? I think that's where the whole like having a gitpod.config, like treating developer environments as cattle and not pets, like pays off, right? Because you're not really worried about yeah, you're closing it down, because you can always just spin it up and get where you were at. So this all yeah, because we treated even developer environments as ephemeral things, right? That's where I think that's where it allowed us to have all the innovation here, pre-builds, like we saw zero onboarding. You can have all the things that are already configured for anyone to be productive on your application. Yeah, I think, like I said, right, if developer experience is one of the important parts to get work done at any company. And I think if remote development even like betters the way we develop things even by 10%, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of developer time, it's a lot of things like taken away from the developer. And I think it's awesome where we are heading it as an ecosystem, right? Not just the company, as an ecosystem. And I'm really excited as a developer, and I saw that being the case with a lot of developers, right? I know some people from India who can like contribute to open source projects, complex open source projects, without having to worry about a bigger machine locally, and it feels as local as possible. And I think there's a lot of accessibility thing yeah going on here, that we'll see in the future. Yeah, that's all. So now, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take, and you can also ping me on Twitter for any of these questions. Yeah, that's all. Thank you, everyone.